Story number 1. The Echoes of Solitude. It was a frigid December evening, and snow had already blanketed the small town of Avellini. Samantha had just finished her final exam at university and was looking forward to spending the holiday break at her family's old Victorian house. However, her parents had decided to take a spontaneous trip to Europe, leaving her home alone. She didn't mind. She cherished solitude. The house stood at the end of a long, winding road, surrounded by dense woods. It was charming during the day, but took on a sinister demeanor as night fell. Samantha settled into the living room, a fire crackling in the hearth, and began reading a book. Around midnight, as the wind howled outside, Samantha heard a faint sound. At first, she thought it was just the creaking of the old house, but then she heard it again. Soft, indistinct whispers. She tried to ignore it, convincing herself it was her imagination. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the hallways. Samantha put down her book and listened intently. The sound seemed to be coming from the basement. She felt a chill run down her spine, but decided to investigate. Grabbing a flashlight, she descended the creaky wooden stairs. The basement was damp and filled with old furniture and boxes. The whispers were clearer now, an eerie, disembodied murmur. Samantha's flashlight flickered, casting long shadows on the walls. She followed the sound to a corner where an old trunk sat, covered in dust. The whispers stopped as she approached. Taking a deep breath, Samantha opened the trunk. Inside, she found an old diary, its leather cover cracked and worn. She flipped through the pages, which were filled with handwritten entries from the late 1800s. The diary belonged to a woman named Eliza, who had lived in the house over a century ago. Eliza's entries began innocuously, describing daily life in the Victorian era. But as Samantha read on, the tone shifted. Eliza wrote about hearing whispers in the night, feeling an unseen presence watching her, and seeing shadows move on their own. Her entries became increasingly frantic, detailing her descent into madness as she claimed the house was haunted. Samantha's hands trembled as she read the final entry. Eliza wrote about a dark figure that appeared at the foot of her bed, whispering her name. She had tried to escape, but the entity followed her, tormenting her until she could no longer bear it. The entry ended abruptly, with a smudge of ink as if Eliza had been dragged away. A sudden loud crash upstairs startled Samantha, and she dropped the diary. She rushed back up the stairs, heart pounding. The living room was in disarray. Books knocked off shelves, furniture overturned. The whispers had returned, louder and more menacing. Samantha's phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw a message from an unknown number. "Get out now." Panic set in. She ran to the front door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew deafening, and she felt a cold breath on the back of her neck. Turning around, she saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. Its eyes glowed with a malevolent light. Samantha backed away, trying to find another exit. The figure glided towards her, whispering her name. She remembered the diary and sprinted back to the basement. The figure followed, its whispers now a cacophony of voices. Reaching the trunk, Samantha grabbed the diary and began reading the last entry aloud, hoping to find a clue to stop the entity. The voices screamed, and the shadow figure recoiled, as if in pain. She continued reading, her voice trembling. The figure shrieked and dissipated into a cloud of black smoke. The house fell silent. Samantha collapsed, clutching the diary. She stayed there until dawn, too afraid to move. When the first light of morning seeped through the basement window, she finally stood up and left the house. Samantha never returned to the old Victorian house. She moved to a bustling city, surrounded by people, leaving behind the echoes of solitude and the horrors that lurked within. But sometimes, late at night, she still heard whispers, reminding her that some secrets should never be unearthed. Story number 2. The Shadows of Eldridge House. Lena arrived at Eldridge House just as the sun was setting. It had been a long drive from the city to the remote countryside where the old family estate stood. Her grandparents had left her the house in their will, and though it had stood empty for years, she had decided to spend a few days there to sort through their belongings and decide what to do with the property. The house was a sprawling, Gothic mansion, its facade darkened with age and ivy creeping up the walls. The locals whispered about it being haunted, but Lena didn't believe in such things. She was more concerned about the creaky floors and the possibility of bats in the attic. After unpacking her bags, Lena decided to explore the house. The interior was filled with antique furniture, paintings, and old books. It had a certain charm, though the dim lighting and long shadows made it feel eerie. She found a dusty chandelier in the grand foyer and an old piano in the parlor, its keys yellowed with age. As night fell, Lena settled into the library with a cup of tea. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. She browsed through the bookshelves, finding volumes of classic literature and a few old journals. One journal, in particular, caught her eye. It belonged to her great-grandfather, Thomas Eldridge, and was dated from the early 1900s. Lena began reading, intrigued by the detailed accounts of daily life in the early 20th century. But as she read further, the entries took a darker turn. Thomas wrote about strange occurrences in the house, unexplained noises, shadows moving on their own, and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The last few entries were particularly disturbing. Thomas described a figure that appeared in his dreams, a tall, shadowy man with glowing red eyes. The figure would stand at the foot of his bed, whispering inaudible words. Thomas believed the figure was a demon, come to claim his soul. The final entry ended with a frantic scrawl. "It is here. I can feel it watching me. God help us all." Lena shivered, closing the journal. The house seemed colder now, the wind outside more menacing. She decided it was time for bed and made her way up the grand staircase to the master bedroom. The room was large, with a canopy bed and heavy drapes. She locked the door behind her, feeling a bit foolish for being spooked by an old journal. In the middle of the night, Lena was awakened by a soft tapping sound. She sat up, listening intently. The tapping continued, rhythmic and deliberate. It seemed to be coming from the window. Gathering her courage, Lena got out of bed and approached the window, drawing back the curtain. There was nothing there but the wind-swept branches of an old oak tree. She returned to bed, but sleep eluded her. The tapping resumed, louder this time, echoing through the room. Lena's heart pounded as she realized it was not coming from the window, but from within the walls. She followed the sound to a section of the wall near the fireplace. Tentatively, she knocked on the wall, and the tapping stopped. Suddenly, a chilling voice whispered her name. "Lena." It was faint, almost drowned out by the wind, but unmistakable. She backed away, terrified. The voice came again, louder. "Lena." Frantic, Lena grabbed her phone and called her friend Mark, who lived in the nearest town. She tried to explain what was happening, but the line was filled with static. "Get out of the house," Mark shouted through the noise. "Now." Lena grabbed her coat and headed for the door, but as she reached the foyer, the front door slammed shut with a force that shook the house. She tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, echoing through the hallways. Desperate, Lena ran to the kitchen, hoping to find another way out. The back door was locked tight, and she couldn't find the key. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch and move, taking on sinister shapes. She felt a cold hand brush against her arm and screamed. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was tall and indistinct, its eyes glowing red, the same figure her great-grandfather had described. It advanced slowly, whispering her name over and over. Lena backed into a corner, her mind racing for a way to escape. In a moment of clarity, she remembered the journal. Thomas had mentioned a hidden passage in the library, a secret escape route. She dashed out of the kitchen, the figure following closely behind. Reaching the library, she frantically searched the shelves, pulling out books and feeling along the walls. Finally, she found a loose panel and pushed it open, revealing a narrow staircase. She hurried down, the whispers and footsteps echoing above her. The passage led to a hidden cellar, and at the far end, a heavy wooden door. Lena pushed it open and stumbled outside into the freezing night. She didn't stop running until she reached the main road, where Mark's car was just pulling up. He jumped out and ran to her, wrapping her in a blanket. "What happened?" he asked, looking back at the house. Lena could only shake her head, tears streaming down her face. "We need to get out of here," she said, her voice trembling. They drove away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. Lena vowed never to return, leaving Eldridge House to the shadows and the whispers that had haunted her family for generations. But even as they sped away, she could still hear the voice in her mind, whispering her name, reminding her that some places are better left forgotten. Story number 3. The Haunting of Redwood Manor. Lily had always been fascinated by the stories her grandmother told about Redwood Manor, the sprawling estate nestled deep in the woods. The house had been in the family for generations, but after her grandmother passed away, it had been left empty. Now, Lily was the sole heir, and she decided to spend some time there, intending to restore it to its former glory. It was a crisp autumn afternoon when Lily arrived. The long driveway was flanked by towering redwoods, their leaves creating a canopy overhead. The house itself was grand but weathered, with ivy creeping up its stone walls and the windows staring out like empty eyes. Despite its dilapidated state, Lily felt a strange sense of belonging. She spent the first few days cleaning and organizing, uncovering hidden rooms and forgotten heirlooms. One evening, while exploring the attic, she found an old, ornate mirror covered in a dusty sheet. Intrigued, she wiped the dust away and gazed into the mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow move behind her, but when she turned around, the room was empty. As night fell, Lily settled into the master bedroom. The bed was large and comfortable, and the room was filled with antique furniture. She found an old journal on the bedside table, its leather cover cracked with age. It belonged to her great-great-grandmother, Beatrice, who had lived in the house over a century ago. Lily started reading, captivated by Beatrice's accounts of life in the manor. But as she read on, the entries became increasingly unsettling. Beatrice wrote about strange occurrences, doors opening and closing on their own, whispers in the dead of night, and a malevolent presence that seemed to watch her every move. The most disturbing entries detailed the presence of a dark figure that haunted Beatrice's dreams and waking hours. It appeared first as a shadow in the mirror, then as a full apparition that moved through the house, leaving cold spots and an overwhelming sense of dread. Beatrice believed the figure was tied to the mirror Lily had found in the attic. That night, Lily had trouble sleeping. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Just as she was about to drift off, she heard a soft creaking sound. She sat up, listening intently. The noise seemed to be coming from the hallway. Gathering her courage, she stepped out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was dark, illuminated only by the moonlight filtering through the windows. Lily crept down the hall, the wooden floorboards creaking under her feet. The sound led her to the attic stairs. Taking a deep breath, she climbed the narrow steps, each one groaning under her weight. The attic was cold and musty. Lily's breath formed clouds in the air as she walked towards the mirror. As she approached, she saw a faint outline in the glass, a shadowy figure standing just behind her. Heart pounding, she spun around, but there was no one there. When she turned back to the mirror, the figure was gone. She hurried back to the bedroom, trying to rationalize what she had seen. It must have been a trick of the light, she told herself. But deep down, she knew there was something more to it. The next day, Lily found herself drawn back to Beatrice's journal. She read about how Beatrice had tried to rid the house of the spirit, consulting mediums and performing rituals, all to no avail. The last entry was the most chilling. It wants something from us. It won't rest until it gets what it desires. That night, the temperature in the house dropped dramatically. Lily bundled up in blankets but couldn't shake the cold. As she lay in bed, she heard the whispering again, soft, insistent. It seemed to be coming from all around her. She clamped her hands over her ears, but the whispers grew louder, more urgent. Suddenly, the mirror in the attic shattered, the sound echoing through the house. Lily jumped out of bed and ran to the attic, finding the mirror in pieces on the floor. Among the shards, she saw something glinting. She carefully picked it up, a small, ornate key. The key felt warm in her hand, as if it had been waiting for her. She searched the attic and found an old chest hidden behind a stack of boxes. The key fit perfectly. Inside the chest, She found a collection of letters and an old locket. The letters were from Beatrice to a man named Charles, whom she had loved deeply. They detailed their plans to marry, but the relationship was cut short by a terrible accident that claimed Charles's life. Beatrice's grief was so profound that she believed his spirit had become trapped in the house, unable to move on. Lily opened the locket and found a small portrait of Beatrice and Charles. As she held it, she felt a wave of sadness and longing wash over her. She realized that the spirit haunting Redwood Manor wasn't malevolent. It was Charles, searching for peace. Determined to help, Lily gathered the letters and the locket and went to the family cemetery behind the house. She found Beatrice's grave, and beside it, an unmarked grave where Charles was buried. She placed the letters and the locket on his grave, whispering a prayer for his soul. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, and Lily felt a warmth spread through her. The oppressive cold lifted, and for the first time, she felt truly at peace in the manor. That night, she slept soundly, free from the whispers and shadows. The next morning, Lily woke to a bright, sunlit house. The dark presence was gone, and the manor felt warm and welcoming. She decided to stay and restore Redwood Manor, honoring her ancestors and the love story that had haunted its halls for so long. Years later, Redwood Manor became a place of joy and celebration, filled with light and laughter. And though Lily never saw the shadowy figure again, she often felt a gentle, comforting presence, watching over her in the home that had finally found peace.